Hello, just a quick demo of the Sysmon Config Pusher application. So step one, when you open the application, one of the first things you want to do is start the web server over here on deploy step 0. Once the web server is started, you can hit the get domain computers button, and this will grab a list of the machines that are joined to your domain. And then from here, you can click select all to grab all these machines, and then click the select computers button. And when you do that, a quick ping check is performed. So only live systems will get populated in this middle box here. And any machine that you click here is the machine that you want to perform these steps on. So in our quick demo, we'll deploy kind of one config to Windows 10 1 and a different config to Windows 10 2. So let's start with Windows 10 1. So we click it, and then the next step we want to do is load configs, and this grabs the configuration files from a directory that you specify in the configuration file for Sysmon Config Pusher itself. And within these configuration files, you'll see how it parses out the tag value here. And if we look at the actual files themselves, the Sysmon configuration files, I put in a comment here called SCP tag, and the Sysmon Config Pusher application will parse out this value. So you can give names to your various Sysmon configuration files in kind of the context that makes sense to you. So in my case, the Swift on Security configuration file is just called Swift on Security config, and the Sysmon modular configuration file is called Sysmon modular. So you can see how the Sysmon Config Pusher application parses these out for you. So on Windows 10 1, I'll go ahead and deploy the modular configuration file. So I'll select that. And then I want to, as step 1, create the directory structure that's needed for the Sysmon config file deployment. And this is a pretty simple step. It just creates a Sysmon files directory off the C drive. For step 2, I want to push the executable for Sysmon onto the host. So if we go back to the host, we can see the file being downloaded here, and after refreshing a few times, it should be done. Step 3 is actually installing Sysmon on the host. So we click that, and then Sysmon is installed, and this is a base installation without any configuration file. And for step 4, we want to actually push the configuration file to the host. So we see our modular configuration file get pushed. And then the final step, step 5, is actually updating the Sysmon deployment on that host with the config file that we just pushed. So the Sysmon modular config. And once we click update, if we go back to the host, check event viewer, and navigate to the Sysmon log channel, we should see an event ID 16, which corresponds to a Sysmon config state changed event, showing us that this particular host got its config file updated to our modular file. So if we go back to our Sysmon Config Pusher application, and this time we want to push the Swift on Security config to Windows 10 2. So we select Windows 10 2, we select our Swift on Security config file. The web server is already started, so we can go to step 1, which is creating the directories, and then we could push the executable. And if we check that host, we should see the folder and the executable hanging out, and just make sure it finishes the download. Then we can go back to Sysmon Config Pusher. We've just done step 2, so we can move on to step 3, which is actually installing Sysmon on that host. And then we could push the config file and just double checking. So we could see that the Windows 10 2 host received the Swift on Security config file here. And then we've done step 4, so we can move on to step 5, which is actually updating the config file on that host. So we just did that. And as a final check, we could open Event Viewer here, navigate to the Sysmon config or log channel. And once again, we look for event ID 16, and we can see here that the Windows 10 2 host had its config file changed to the Swift on security config. So we just pushed 2 different versions of Sysmon configuration file to 2 different hosts.